Though it's only been 10 games, I'm going to tell you why it's all right to believe that maybe it does mean something after all. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. There's no better app out there than Game Time to buy tickets, whether it be to baseball games, basketball games, football games, comedy shows, concerts. It does not matter. They have the best possible deals for you. It's easy to use. It's easy to sort. They tell you where the cheapest deals are, the best bundle deals. Whether you're going by yourself with a giant group of people, Game Time is the place to go to, and we're going to have more on them and a code you can use coming up in about 15 minutes or so. If you're a first-time listener, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. We're continuing to surge in numbers. We're now up to the top 80 on Apple Podcasts and baseball podcasts around the world. So that is very exciting for us here on the Locked On Royals channel. And then also we're up to nearly 1,300 subscribers on YouTube, which is nearly a 1K increase since we took over with this podcast way back last June. So really thank you all for continuing to subscribe, letting other people know about this podcast, and leaving good reviews, because it's really showed tremendous growth, not only recognized here, but also recognized by my peers as well. So that I very much thank you for. But again, if you're the new listener and you're just now joining in with this podcast and you want to know more about the Royals and you want to know more about me, well, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work here at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do some hosting, do some co-hosting, and some producing as well. So my world in the sports world is very, very busy. But when you come to this podcast link, you know that you were getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And I think the way we've wanted to construct this podcast, or at least moving forward, it works out best for my schedule, is trying to get these out in the morning time, because after coming home from work and running some errands, going to the gym, I don't want to be doing this podcast right before the game, because not a lot of eyeballs are going to be on a podcast leading up to the game. You'd much rather watch it throughout the day or during the morning when you're having your coffee. So that's going to be my goal moving forward, and hopefully can have that done in a timely manner. Now, yesterday was a little bit different because there was an off day. It didn't really matter where I put the podcast out. I did do it for the afternoon time, but typically on off days, I can do them in the evening time just because there's no game to work around here. But it was a very feel-good Monday, I guess I would say, about this Royals team, because they're 6-4. They've won 4 in a row. They're coming off a 4-game sweep of the Chicago White Sox, and now they've got 3 against the Houston Astros, the reigning American League West champions, and that makes 3 of 4 series to begin the year for the Royals in which they are facing a reigning division champ. So lots of great tests early on. The first 2 division champs they faced, they lost both of those series, though they all were very competitive. Speaking of those games, all those games were very competitive. But I thought it was interesting yesterday because you have this sense of hope, you have this sense of optimism, this excitement around the team. And one thing that's always going to rein Royals fans back in is the fact that at any given point, they could collapse. They could have a bad series. They could get swept. And you almost tell yourself to be negative or pessimistic so that you can prove others wrong. At least that's the energy and the vibe I get. And I'm here to tell you, at least with this opening segment, it's all right to enjoy what's happening now. And that is, I think, a season-long process, right? If you tell yourself now, with the Royals being 6-4, well, I'm not going to get my hopes up. I think that a collapse is coming. That's fine to prepare yourself. I'm not trying to, have people all believe this team is a playoff team, because they're not yet. They, as good as they've been through 10, they've still choked away a few games. They still have their struggles offensively from time to time. And you just never know in baseball. But through 10 games, it's hard to argue with 6-4. 6-4 is a very good mark for a Royals team that typically struggles in April. But when you look at a team that's 6-4 and you're having fun watching them, and I saw somebody say, I think it was Devin, who's a constant on Mailbag Friday, of it's the most fun he's had watching the Royals since 2016. That's a good thing to hear. Like, you want to enjoy what you are watching. And, throughout my life, I've had some jobs covering teams that were putrid. Okay. And that goes for some Royals teams of last year, Royals teams of 2018 and 19. In college, I covered Kansas football in the bad years under Les Miles and David Beatty. So I had definitely seen stuff when it was really bad. But the good thing in those dark times, whatever sport I was covering, was that you had people that could appreciate a good thing when it happened, or a good stretch when it happened. I think with this Royals team, that's kind of where I'm at. 6-4 is a small sample size, whether it's in April or it's June or it's August or September, but it doesn't mean you have to squash it with, well, they're going to be bad eventually. There's no harm in feeling optimistic, right? I'm never going to tell anybody that they need to believe in this team, or when things get bad, I'm going to say you shouldn't believe in this team. Everybody's entitled to think how they want about this team. But the way I have approached it, for as bad as last year was, for as bad as every year has been since 2017, it's all right to bask in a little bit of good baseball. Like, you feel good watching MLB Network if you have it on your cable provider or you have it on a streaming service. I know I don't, but I still from time to time keep up with MLB Network. But you feel good watching that. You feel good reading things on Twitter. You're invested. You're excited. You are living game by game. And I think it's a better way and a more fun way to look at this team and say, I'm excited about the game because I believe they're going somewhere, rather than the approach of, well, they're good, but it's 10 games and I'm waiting for the collapse. I'm waiting for this team to bottom out. That could happen. That very well could happen. We don't know. It's a long season, right? I had a fan bring up yesterday, in 2021, the Royals were 16-9 and in first place until May 3rd. They also had a negative run differential, or this Royals team was a top 5 run differential. So I think that 21 team was just bad in disguise. They weren't really that good of a baseball team. They were very lucky when they were losing. They were getting pounded, and they had a couple of really bad teams they were facing in that first month of the season. The Royals have been battle-tested early on, and they've survived at least through the first 10 games. But I'm just here to tell people that it's all right to feel good. It's all right to be optimistic, because with this baseball franchise, there have not been many stretches, and I mean even 10-game stretches over the last, 5 or 6 years that you could say, hey, I feel good about where this team is at. Because if they had a 6-4 stretch, it was likely when they were already out of the race. Like, it's kind of fun to me to look at the AL Central standings and know you're not buried yet. And I don't envision the Royals getting buried for quite some time, if at all, this season. It's all right to dream a little bit, though. And I think that's the fun way to watch sports. No matter how tortured you are as a fan, no matter what success you've seen, it's okay to indulge in some of the wild beliefs of where this team could go. Like, it's fun to watch this team win a game and then look around the Central and go, they can compete with some of these teams. And there's going to be bad stretches. Like, I would be naive and just saying that the Royals are going to go all year long without a losing streak. That's going to happen, right? And it can be as quick as what you saw in Detroit over the last couple of days. Detroit was 6-1. Everybody's talking about Detroit. Pitching staff, the bullpen's one of the best in baseball. They've lost 3 in a row. They lost a series at home against the Oakland A's, and they got beat by 3 by Pittsburgh last night. I actually had a chance to watch a little bit of that game. So, like, it can happen that quickly. The Royals can get swept against Houston, and then you look up and they're 6-7, back under 500. You just never know. But I just don't think it's always the best way to watch baseball to, maybe even get to June or July and this team's still competing, and it's like, well, just wait a little bit longer. Well, then you just have gone 3 months of not wanting to enjoy competitive baseball. Like me, I want to have this approach with this team. And yeah, I've been around them, now since spring training, or at least had a chance to see them in spring training. It's a fun group. It's a team that really believes in themselves. There's a lot of juice to this team, and I'm all right. Just enjoying the moment of where it's at, because there's going to be stretches in the dog days of summer where you just feel like, man, you got to snap this streak. Whether they've lost 3 in a row or 4 in a row, you hope they avoid those 8 or 9 game losing streaks. But you just enjoy good baseball when you have it. The Royals' rotation has been good. The bullpen's evened out a little bit. The offense has been pretty good. You just enjoy a 10-game sample size, and you take it for what it is. You can feel good about it. You can feel optimistic. Now, for those that won't agree, you'll say, hold on, Jack. It's a 10-game sample size, and I choose to keep myself grounded by thinking, well, stuff can always go wrong. That's the case with any team. Stuff can always go wrong, but stuff can always go right as well. Who says that this isn't the start of a 10-game winning streak or the Royals winning, 25 of 35 games, something like that? Who says that can't happen? You never know because baseball's unpredictable. But for those out there that are kind of on the fence, it's more so what this segment's about of, should I buy into it? Should I be waiting for the inevitable negatives to come? I would just say take it for what it is, but enjoy it. Enjoy it. And if you want to be optimistic, be optimistic. It's all right to have fun and enjoy watching this team and start to believe a little bit, even if it is 10 games. It's a long season, but when it's a long season, you need spurts like this. And the Royals, for right now, at this point in time, they've been a fun baseball team to watch through 10 games. And they'll have the Houston Astros coming to Kansas City tonight. It'll be Cole Reagans on the bump against Christian Javier. We'll talk more about that series in the final segment of the show. For our next segment, we're going to talk about 2 arms that were recently added to the Royals minor league system. And maybe at some point, we see at least one of them in Kansas City. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today in Game Time. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning part of the show, Game Time is where I go to buy tickets. Last couple of months, I've gone to a few concerts, and I bought my tickets at Game Time. Last couple of Royals games I've been to, you guessed it, I bought it at Game Time. Actually went to a comedy show last week and also bought my tickets over at Game Time. They just make it so simple for you. And anytime I'm scanning tickets, I used to go through all the different apps and try to check out what those prices were. But with Game Time, it's the only place I go to now. I can see the best bundles. I can see the best deals. They sort everything easily for me. The hottest deals, the cheapest deals. It's just great. And then I get the confirmation email and the tickets are sent right where I need them to be. They're easy to access. And I don't have to worry. I don't have to stress whether I'm going by myself or I'm going with a group of people. So Game Time absolutely is where you should head off to when thinking about buying tickets. Maybe you're going tonight to the game. And if you're thinking about it, I really strongly urge you to go with Game Time, especially if you are going to be going with a big group of people. And here is why. What you need to do is download the app. And right now until April 14th, you can get $20 off by using code FIRSTPITCH. The terms apply, and you can use code FIRSTPITCH, FIRSTPITCH, for a purchase of $150 or more. You can get $20 off on that with that code of, again, First Pitch. So download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, the Royals made a couple of minor moves in the last 24 to 48 hours or so. They bring in Colin Selby from the Pittsburgh Pirates. They trade away one of their minor league farmhands. I believe it was Connor Oliver, if I'm not mistaken. So Colin Selby comes over from Pittsburgh, a 26-year-old that only has 1 year under his belt at the big league level, had I think it was a 7 or a 9.00 ERA. Just not good. And if you're the 7 or in the 9, at that point, you're a little bit interchangeable, to be honest with you. The numbers aren't good. But I thought there was a little bit of a intriguing part of Colin Selby's ability that compares a little bit to James MacArthur. And when the Royals made that move and when they made it, it was, okay, that doesn't make too much sense. I don't know why you'd give up an 18, 19-year-old prospect and go after a 26, 27-year-old AA guy. Now you look up and James MacArthur's the closer of this above 500 baseball team. With Colin Selby, I'm not saying it's going to be the same, right? You never know in baseball. But we have seen a lot more hits on the Royals front office, right? That's maybe not the best way to say it. A lot more hits from the Royals front office, not hits on the Royals front office. That would be a very bad thing. But I would say they've found more diamonds in the rough, if you will, by really identifying what they look for in a pitcher, what they want in a pitcher. And that goes back to Cole Reagans. What they loved about Cole Reagans, they loved the spin rate, more of the analytical approach. With James McArthur, it was the curveball. Nelson Velasquez, it was the pure and raw power. And I had heard a couple different things down in Surprise when I was down there about what the Royals department was looking like. And James McArthur was strictly analytical. And I feel like the Colin Selby acquisition on Sunday, strictly analytical. And I went in and did a deep dive into some of his film. I went a deep dive into some of his numbers, and it checks out exactly what they like in their pitchers, the mold of their pitchers. The curveball spin rate was elite. He's a high velocity arm. His sinker runs anywhere from 96 to 98. Absolutely worth a flyer. Now, the Pirates just DFA'd him. When they brought in Joey Bart, who's now crushing it over with the 9-2 Pirates, I think it is, they had to DFA somebody. They DFA Colin Selby. And Colin Selby's numbers, as we said, were not good last year. They were not good at the big league level. Like, there's a reason he was DFA'd. The numbers were not great. But the strikeout numbers were there. Command wasn't really there. But for a flyer, there are worse guys to take one on than Selby. When you've got a really good spin rate on an off-speed pitch, a breaking pitch, and specifically for the Royals, it is the curveball. They love the curveball spin rate. And then you look at a fastball and sinker velocity. If it runs up 95, 96, 97 on average, that's a power arm right there. Now, they've stashed him away in Omaha, but it would not shock me if he has a similar path that James McArthur had. You see where he's at, how he progresses a little bit. And then maybe it would take him some time if he got up to Kansas City and the numbers weren't really there. But it's bullpen depth. And bullpen depth is never a bad thing. And the way the bullpens look this season, I'd imagine that we're going to see a couple of new guys throughout this season. They're just going to get their chance, whether it's injury or with guys struggling. And this is somebody that's intriguing, at least. The Royals didn't really give up anything. The Pirates were willing to unload him because he was DFA'd. But there's stuff to like there, and it fits the mold of what the pitching department likes. And the last couple times they have looked at somebody, they have hit on that player. They have looked really, really good when trying to identify what makes their pitchers successful. And what makes their pitchers successful, at least the last couple ones, have been a really good curveball, really good spin rate. And, Cole Reagans is more of that anomaly that, you didn't just hit on him. I mean, you might have, found an absolute gem, an absolute star in Cole Reagans. James McArthur's still working there, but you can see the progression. Nelson Velasquez, he's not in the pitching department side, but he's one of those guys you looked at, you didn't give up much, and you've bolstered your lineup a little bit. These moves now I look at a little bit differently than what I did a couple of years back. It was like anybody the Royals got, whether it was giving away a formidable piece from their lineup or their rotation, I just never thought whoever they got in return was going to turn into something because there wasn't a ton to like. Now with these moves, I'm a little bit more intrigued by them, a little bit more interested because there obviously is some interest there. You don't just make this trade to make this trade. They see something in Colin Selby. I'd be very curious when reaching out to some people if they went after him because the analytical department said so, because the scout said so. There's something to like there. And it would not shock me if we see him up in Kansas City pitching out of the bullpen at some point in time. But for right now, it's going to be in Omaha for Selby. The other arm they brought in was Zach Davies, who I don't really think is much of a intriguing option. He does have major league experience, a ton of it, in fact. Had some off-field stuff that came to light that wasn't that positive. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just go Google him, and you can probably find that on Wikipedia. That, to me, feels more like when we start calling up some guys or we have somebody move up from the bullpen, you're there for depth. I would be pretty surprised if Zach Davies gets to Kansas City at any point this season. I never really liked his stuff when he was in the big leagues. He was not good last year for Arizona. And, I mean, his velocity is one of the slowest in all of Major League Baseball. At least it was last year. I mean, he's at about like 83, 84 with his fastball. I don't even know if he throws his fastball anymore. He might be just trying to finesse his way back onto a big league roster with the off-speed stuff that he can bring you. But to me, that felt more like depth than anything. That doesn't really have the upside feel that someone like Colin Selby could have. Now, both these guys, could maybe never get to Kansas City, or Selby doesn't and Zach Davies does. I can always be wrong on these things, but the way these moves were made, it definitely feels like with Davies being a minor league deal and the Royals trading for Selby, they feel like there's a little bit something more there with him than there is with Zach Davies. Zach Davies feels more like depth than anything. But I guess we'll have to wait and see there. Two interesting moves, at least for the Royals, over the last 24 to 48 hours or so. All right, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, let's take a deep dive into this Houston preview. The Royals will see the Astros for 3 games, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, before heading off on a road trip, a 6-game road trip, where they'll see the New York Mets and the Chicago White Sox, who fell to 1-9 yesterday and were shut out for the 4th time in 10 games. So I'm sure the Royals will be excited to see them once again. But first things first, you got to at least take a series against the Houston Astros, who have suddenly found a little bit of rhythm. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other sponsor today in PrizePicks. Spring training is over and baseball season is officially underway. Don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the diamond in your PrizePick entries. Whether it's strikeouts, RBIs, or first inning runs, take your pick of more or less and add them to your PrizePicks entry today. Get in on the playoff action too and win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during basketball's postseason. Now, UConn, for the 2nd straight year, cut down the nets in NCAA men's basketball. South Carolina on the women's side just won as well. But the NBA is going to have the playoffs coming up in a few months or so. But the playoffs here at PrizePicks begins April 20th, with the play-in rounds being April 16th, April 17th, and April 19th. Well, as for tonight, the Royals will take on the Houston Astros. It'll be a great pitching matchup. Christian Javier, the Astros, will take on Cole Reagans of the Kansas City Royals, still in search of his first win of the season, though he pitched well enough in the first 2 to earn a victory, just didn't really have the run support or the bullpen support in both of those games. But do not mistake Houston for a bad team. Their 4-7 record is not really important to me, especially not this early on in the season. And that might sound hypocritical because I said in the first segment today, take the Royals for what they are, enjoy it, and bask in it. Good baseball is hard to come by at this level, so you always want to celebrate when you have a 10-game stretch over 500. For Houston fans, I think it's the opposite of not happy with the way they played, but when you're as successful as they've been, when you've won as many World Series as them, which is 2 in the last, less than 10 years now. Yeah, so I think it's only 7 years. They've won 2 in that stretch. One of them has an asterisk next to it. But still, Houston Astros fans have that ability with slow starts to go, they're going to be just fine. The last year, the Astros never really hit their stride. A couple of times in a few months in the middle where they did play good baseball, but they were struggling in September. Like, they limped into the playoffs and then, of course, got pretty damn far in the playoffs. They got to 1 game away from the World Series before the Rangers came back and won Game 6 and 7 in Minute Maid Park to go to the World Series and eventually become the champions of baseball. But this Houston team still has loaded talent. They still have a good rotation. Christian Javier, you could argue, although you had a guy that already threw a no-hitter for the Houston Astros, and he's allowed only 1 hit in his first 14 innings, or maybe it was 12 innings, something like that. But you look at Christian Javier, he's the ace, right? He is the star of that rotation. Then you're going to see, Hunter Brown and JP France in Game 2 and Game 3. Good arms. I'm not going to say they're slouches or anything like that, or they're not anything you should bat an eye at. But Christian Javier is the guy. But it's good for the Royals. They've got their ace on the bump as well. And as for the lineup, for Houston, you look at Yordan Alvarez, who just hit one to the moon in Arlington last night, and they had a 10-run output in that game against the Rangers. They've suddenly caught fire a little bit. The Mets, who the Royals will see on the weekend, have suddenly caught fire a little bit. So you have some of those teams that had got off the slow starts are starting to wake up a little bit more. Now, for the Royals, I think it's a really good test. You're not getting Houston at their lowest point. They were 2-7 at one point. Now they're winners of 2 in a row. And they beat a very good Texas team that's in their division. They're the reigning American League champs, the reigning World Series champs. Houston made a little bit of a statement that our 2-7 start is not that meaningful. We are going to be there in the long run. And whether they start 4-10, even if the Royals sweep them, that's not going to waver my confidence in where they'll be at the end of the year. They're too good. They're too loaded. They have too much postseason experience to have a slow start crumble them. But for this series and the Royals, you're 6-4. I think at worst, you need to still walk out of that series over 500, which would mean taking one of those games. If you grab one tonight, you got to take the series. Either Seth Lugo or Brady Singer has to grab that game. Now, Brady Singer will be pitching on Thursday afternoon, so it won't be 3 night games. You'll have that one a short day's rest on Thursday before heading off to Flushing to take on the Mets. But this is I would say, a favorable pitching series for the Royals. It's not like Christian Javier is going up against Alec Marsh. The Royals had an unfortunate matchup on Sunday that they found a way to win that game because they had their number 5 starter and Alec Marsh go up against the White Sox number 1 and Garrett Crochet. Like usually in baseball, that's never going to be a winnable game for you. You're just hoping that it can be close enough, and then you get into that team's bullpen. For the Royals in this series, I think they've got the advantage in 2 of the 3 games. I think Brady Singer is pitching well right now, but I'm not sure I would take him at this point in time over JP France. I mean, to begin the year, probably lean on Brady Singer's side, but career-wise, I think JP France could have a little bit more of a successful career. But in games 1 and games 2, Cole Reagans, I'm taking over Javier, and I'm probably taking Seth Lugo at this point over Hunter Brown. There's a lot of upside to Hunter Brown, but Seth Lugo the last 2 years has been really, really good and really effective. So to me, this is another great opportunity to take 2 of 3. And it's important because when you're going on a 6-game road trip, you want to make sure that you have a little bit of a cushion, right? If you go 2-1 in this series and you're 8-5, well, it takes pressure off you that if you don't win the series in Flushing against the Mets, you could find a way to just get out of there with 1 win. And then that would be 9-7. And then you're taking on the Chicago White Sox, who you very well could sweep again, though it would be pretty incredible to have 7 straight victories over one team in the month of April. But still, you take care of business. You win this series against Houston and capitalize when they're not at their hottest point. You feel good about where you are heading into the road trip. But as for tonight, I mean, it's Cole Reagans on the bump. He looked masterful and should have won that game against the Orioles last Wednesday. He gets another opportunity now. It's his 2nd game this season, pitching at home. He faced the Astros, I think, twice last year. I know he faced them at Minute Maid Park, had a quality start. Stuff was electric. That was in front of a packed, sold-out crowd. Probably not going to see the same type of capacity in these couple of games at home in Kansas City, just because I'm not sure either if the fans are buying into the start just yet, or it's a weekday game still in the middle of the school year. Probably a couple different factors, but the weather should be really good. So if you're debating it, again, use Game Time, buy some tickets, and go watch Cole Reagans throw the ball tonight against Christian Javier and the Houston Astros. But a fun series. I love that they've gotten out to this 6-4 start with where I needed them, or at least my projection was for them to be after the 32 games. This 32-game stretch is the tough stretch for the Royals to begin the year. They get there at 14-18. I said I'd be all right with it. But 14-18 might be lowballing it at this point. You're 6-4. That would be 8-14, I believe, the rest of the way, and the rest of these 32 games. With the White Sox still for 3 more games, a struggling Mets team, or one that's gotten a little bit hotter, a Houston Astros team that's not playing their best ball, you can capitalize right here, but it's got to start tonight. You got to continue this hot stretch. You've won 4 in a row. Feel pretty good with your ace taking the bump against the ace of the Houston Astros and Christian Javier. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me that follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15, and follow us on wherever you listen to your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. Before we say goodbye, one last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about what that game looked like between Reagans and Christian Javier, dive into a little bit more of this lineup and how they are overachieving, though the numbers overall may not show it, and maybe what we can expect from this bullpen once again moving into their first extended road trip of the year. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.